to this, another episode of A Million Little TV Shows podcast. This is where we break down and discuss episodes of TV shows that you may not have even heard of. I believe these TV shows need a little more love, and that is what this platform is here to do. Each week we will be covering different shows from all over the globe. We'll be breaking down each episode, giving you the main highlights, and going through it bit by bit. But for now, I think it's best that we find out what's on the menu today. Hello there, and welcome back to this A Million Little TV Shows podcast. This is now episode 11 of season 7, so we are very close to that 100 now. And I'm actually really excited about this one today. It's a really funny show, and it's something that sort of just came out of nowhere, really. It had one season because it's just a limited series, and I just found it really funny because a lot of it I feel is very similar to me. Apart from the fact that I'm not a black woman, which the lead character is, played by Michelle De Swarte, who is an incredible comedian, and I've heard her on a lot of other podcasts, and she's absolutely fantastic. So when I heard that this series was coming out, I knew I had to watch it, and it lived up to the hype. It's absolutely brilliant. But today we're going to be covering a horror comedy series called The Baby. And like I say, it's only 8 episodes, it's a very short series, so obviously I'm going to cover it over 2 episodes, this episode and episode 13, which is going to conclude the series, and I just really enjoyed it. I found it very funny. I found it relatable to myself, like I've said, apart from the obvious parts, but obviously I'll get into why I feel related to this character as we go through. But I think I'm just going to get right into it. First of all, obviously I've got to shill myself, so if you are listening to this and you haven't subscribed to Patreon, please head over there. It's going to be a massive help. And like I say, I can do more bits with this podcast. And also, like, share, subscribe, all that kind of stuff, because it just really helps out the numbers. The numbers are looking great. I haven't commented on them for a while, but they are looking great. And I'm really happy with the way that this podcast has gone and how far it's actually gone. So thank you for listening to this. But like I say, we're going to get into it. So this is The Baby miniseries, episodes 1 to 4. Episode 1, The Arrival. So straight away, we have a dark night where a woman is running towards a cliff edge. She has what looks to be a satchel with her, and as she approaches the cliff edge, out of the trees behind her come 2 police officers. They're yelling and telling her not to do what she's about to do, and that they need to see what's in the bag. She takes the bag off, she puts it down, and as she opens it up, the woman seems really quite distressed, and as she takes the bag off, puts it down on the ground, opens it up, we find out that it's actually a baby in there. Now, I'm not great with children, so I wouldn't be able to speculate what kind of age this was, but maybe 6 months. As she puts the baby on the ground, she starts to back up towards the cliff edge. The police tell her not to do the thing that she's about to do, but she does it anyway and falls to her death. Just then, the shocked police don't know what to do until they see the baby also crawling towards the edge to follow the woman off. The police spring into action and start running towards the cliff edge to try and get hold of the baby before it falls off. And as always, there's that dramatic point where the baby actually goes over the cliff edge, but the officer has managed to dive and catch it just beforehand. However, that's not what happened here, as we see the police officer bring his hand back into the shot with just a sock. And so we can only assume that the baby has had exactly the same fate as the mother, or assumed mother. Throughout this whole opening sequence, we actually hear a very disturbing voice, or a noise that is beyond this world, and we're not sure where it's emanating from. We then cut to a flat, where a woman, Natasha, is having friends round. Her friends, Mags and Rita, they're all sat around playing poker, and drinking, smoking, whatever it is. Natasha seems to be the one who's a bit of a life of the party and is around mid to late 30s, who hasn't really settled yet. The other 2 seem a little bit more head screwed on and are just enjoying the night, whereas Natasha just seems to want to party hard like she did before. Eventually we hear a baby from the other room, and Mags goes through and picks up her son. Mags brings her back through, and then cigarettes have to be extinguished, and the room has to be made a little bit more comfortable for the baby, with obvious reasons. But also with obvious reasons, since Natasha doesn't have this in her life, she doesn't feel the warmth towards it and doesn't seem to have that maternal instinct. And this is where I go back to me. I don't have that paternal instinct, and if people are like, I'm bringing my child, I'm like, I'm not coming. Because it's not something that I'm bothered about. And I know that sounds harsh, but, I don't really, that thing has passed me by now. And I'm not into being around people with children for that reason. And like I say, I know how it sounds. A good few friends of mine have kids, and whenever they talk about them, I'm happy to listen, but I can't engage much. I have no idea what's going on. And I'm likely to never have the idea of what's going on, so I'd just rather distance myself from it. And that's where I feel this kinship with Natasha in these first opening scenes. Her friend Rita then tells her that she's also pregnant, and when Natasha jokes that it's not too late to get rid of it, essentially, when Rita tells her that she's only 3 months pregnant, Rita doesn't find the joke funny and obviously walks out. And again, it's very much a joke I would make, even to someone with a child who is 11 years old. It's never too late. But I am only kidding. But I just think the way that the joke was delivered, and obviously the setup to it, was not great. She'd already insulted one baby and now she was telling her friend to get rid of the other, so I get it. The next day, Natasha's heading off to actually go on holiday. She's heading out to the coastline of England and she's going to be staying in a cabin somewhere. However, when she actually gets there, she finds out that this place is an absolute shithole. For instance, the reason it is a shithole is A, it's a shack by the sea, B, it has a coin-operated TV inside, and C, the woman who's actually renting it to her tells her there's no smoking inside when she's clearly smoking. Now, Natasha is a big smoker, and that seems to be an issue for her. So, during the night, as she heads outside, she actually lights up a cig, and then all of a sudden, there's movement from up top of the cliffs, where she's actually stood, and next thing, this woman comes crashing down next to her, covering her in blood. As she heads over to look at the body and see what's going on, all of a sudden, she looks up again after some commotion, and a baby falls straight into her arms. She heads inside, the police come, and she's just in total shock. She's still holding the baby the same way that she was holding the baby when she caught it. And then throughout, when she's trying to give this police officer a glass of water, she's still holding the baby the same way. It's ridiculous. She hands the baby over to the police, and they head off. But as they do, the next thing she hears is a massive crash. The sirens of the police car go on, and as she walks outside, she finds that a rock has fallen from up above and crushed the car. She opens the back seat, and the baby is sat in there unharmed. And so, as the audience and as the character, we now see that there's something amiss with this child. And we see this further when she stops off at a petrol station to just use the facilities and leaves the baby, which she's got in a laundry basket. She leaves this baby with the actual worker in the shop. When she decides that she can actually sneak out and try and get away, she sneaks out the window, gets in the car won't start. As she looks over at the shop, she sees the man trying to get something off a high shelf, but then more commotion, and she heads back into the shop to find the shopkeeper dead, with the baby just sat on the counter laughing. And so now she has to take the baby for herself. She takes it to the police station, and when she gets there, they arrest her, even though the police officers were crushed by a fucking boulder. She even states it herself. What did you think I did? Pushed a 1,000-pound boulder onto this car. Eventually she gets out and heads home. Once she gets home and gets showered, gets all the blood off of her finally, and manages to start getting back into her routine, her doorbell goes. But at the time she's actually stood the other side of her door, and there's a frosted glass panel between her and the outside world. And so she would have seen the shadow of someone stood there. She opens the door, looks out into the street, and there's no one, until she hears a baby cooing, and she looks down, and obviously this child is sat there. And so now what the fuck is she gonna do? Episode 2, The Seduction. So we actually meet the character that we met before in Lydia. Lydia is the woman who we met at the beginning of the first episode, who was running towards the cliff edge. She, however, seems to just have a normal life. She works in a sort of Dunkin' Donuts type place, but they sell cookies instead. As her and her colleague Foos are trying to pack up for the night, a woman walks in. Foos makes excuses and heads out. He takes his dog with him, but the dog, at this time, barks at the child that this woman is with. This woman, Yolanda, sits down and asks if she can have a coffee. Reluctantly, Lydia serves her and heads off into the back to finish packing up for the night. At this point, she's got her headphones on and she is just listening to some music. However, in the other room, Yolanda is now choking on this cookie that she's been given, as we begin to hear the familiar chanting from this child. Eventually, Yolanda drops down dead, and now the responsibility of the baby is on Lydia. And we all know how that ended up. We then cut to the present, where the new owner of this baby is waking up to the next day after this baby turned up on her doorstep. Her friend Rita turns up and says, "What the hell is going on? Why have I had so many missed calls from you?" She brings Rita inside, and as soon as Rita sees the baby, she's not shocked by it. Everybody knows that Natasha has a baby, so she doesn't understand the issue. She just thinks that Natasha is acting weird because she's always had this child. Obviously, Natasha knows a lot different and can't believe what is going on. Rita tells Natasha, maybe you need some help and maybe you should call your sister. Maybe Bobby can come over and help you out with this, because you're obviously struggling and never easy having an infant and you just need a little bit of help. She's just trying to help her friend out, although her friend is freaking out because she's never had a child. She then rings Mags and asks Mags if the other night when they were playing poker, did she have a baby? Mags isn't actually wanting to tolerate this behaviour, but when she tells her, look, once you've put him down, if you want me to come over and hang out, I'll come over. And it's at this point that she thinks that she's maybe going crazy. Natasha knows that she's never had a child, but everyone else is talking as if the opposite is true, and that she's just going mad. She begins to look into Lydia's background, who she knows was the woman who died, and she heads off to the cookie place, where she actually worked. Once she gets there, she meets Foos, and Foos has never actually seen this baby before, even though we know that he met it at the beginning of the episode. And so it would seem that the only thing that actually recognises this baby is the dog, and the dog starts barking. Foos keeps playing a game of fetch with the dog, and eventually the dog wants to start playing it with the baby. While Natasha and Foos sort out what actually happened the day that Lydia ended up with this child. They look on the CCTV and find that Yolanda came in on the day with the baby, and then Lydia ended up with the child. But Foos recognises none of this. He only remembers Lydia. He doesn't remember anything to do with his child. But he does know that things start to happen just after the date that she saw what happened with Yolanda. It's at this point that the baby, we see him pick up the ball, throw it out of the door, and Foos's dog goes out into the street and gets run over. Natasha starts to freak out because she knows that the dog and others have now died, and it's possibly due to something to do with this baby. When she gets home, she's received a package, and when she opens this package, she finds a USB drive. She starts looking at the photos on the drive and finds that this baby has been photographed with several different women over the last few decades as the same age that it is now, maybe even longer. She freaks out and she takes it into the middle of this field where she's just going to abandon it, because every time she tries to get away from it while she's in the flat, it just keeps appearing. And so she thinks that if she just gets rid of it, then that's going to be it. But when she's heading back to the car, she realises the consequences of her actions and that it is a baby after all. What is she doing? She heads back, she picks up the baby and takes it back to the car. As soon as she sits in the car, she hears a voice from the back seat say, "We need to talk." And when she looks back there is an old woman sat in the car. Episode 3, The Bulldozer. So now back at her flat, Natasha speaks to Mrs. Eves, and Mrs. Eves tells her that she's going to help her get rid of this child. She is going to help her kill the baby. But of course at this point, Natasha's thinking, what the fuck? She literally left the child in a field, but now she's starting to feel remorse for that. She wants to make sure that the baby is safe. But of course she's conflicted because she knows what this baby has done and can do. And so she's in a bad situation. She knows that she wants to do the moral thing, which is look after the child, but there's something not right about it. And so having someone there who understands what this baby can do and help get rid of it might be a good thing for Natasha at this point. And so just after arguing with Mrs. Eves about what's been going on, Natasha asks, what do I have to do? Mrs. Eves tells her that to get the upper hand on this child, they need to get it to go to sleep. That way they can have an advantage. They can sort of sneak up on it. But of course, at this point, Natasha has no idea what to do with the child. She isn't its mother, like everyone else thinks she is. So getting it to sleep isn't something that she's actually thought of before. However, she knows that Mags has been having issues with her child getting to sleep, unless it has its favourite toy with it. So she calls her friend and asks whether she can borrow this toy. Mags tells her that she's going out for the day and not to bother her, but Natasha manages to track her down. When she gets to this mum and baby group that Mags is actually a part of, Mags tells Natasha that it's fine if she stays, but if she is going to stay and she wants to use this toy, then she has to stick around with the rest of this group. Natasha, desperate at this point, because obviously they want to get rid of this child, decides that they're going to stay. But when this toy gets destroyed by the baby after it's woken up, the mothers want to kick it out, or at least they want to kick Natasha out. Natasha leaves and one of the mums gets into an incident and ends up trying to take Natasha's pram apart. And as she does, she slices off one of her fingers. Embarrassed, Natasha leaves and heads back to Mrs. Eves' car, which it seems that Mrs. Eves lives in this car. She gets a text message from her sister, Bobby, saying that she needs her help and she needs her to come over. Bobby and her girlfriend Sam are actually trying to adopt a child at this particular point, and so they put together this whole routine once the social worker comes over so that they can sort of impress this woman. However, when the social workers got there, it turns out that Sam hasn't turned up. Bobby and Natasha haven't seen each other for 3 years, and so when Natasha gets this text, she's shocked, but Natasha heads over anyway. When she gets there, Bobby is a bit of a mess. Obviously Sam hasn't turned up and she is wondering where the hell she is. And of course, Natasha has the one thing that Bobby wants, a child. They head downstairs, they meet the social worker, but the social worker can't understand why she hasn't met Natasha yet, because she has to meet every member of the family, and she thought that Natasha was living abroad. As the social worker speaks to Natasha, she gives very forthright answers, because they've already had issues with authority before, and Natasha seems to be uncomfortable in this situation, and so is fairly aggressive with her answers. But while this is all going on, they don't realise that Bobby is actually holding the baby, and he's quiet. He's actually full on asleep. And so when Mrs. Eve spots this, she realises that they need to use that technique on the child once they get it home, and then they can do the deed. Mrs. Eves and Natasha make their excuses and they head back to the flat. However, once they get there, Natasha is handed the knife by Mrs. Eves and is looking to get rid of the child. However, she can't. It's a baby. It's the most innocent thing in the world and it's done no harm. Obviously, we know different and so does Natasha, but when you're looking at a child, it's innocent. And so she feels that she can't do it. Mrs. Eves, however, has a different thought and tries to take hold of the knife. They tussle and battle over the knife. Then the door goes and it's Bobby. She's wondering what the hell's going on and who this woman is and where all of a sudden this child came from. Like I say, they've not seen each other for 3 years and it's plausible that her sister could have had a baby in that time. Everyone else thinks she's a mum anyway, so why wouldn't her sister? She explains that Mrs. Eves is a yoga teacher, makes her excuses and tells Bobby to leave. Just then, from the other side of the door, Bobby hears more scuffling around inside, and as Mrs. Eves and Natasha head back into the bedroom where the baby was, the baby's gone. Episode 4, The Mother. Natasha starts ringing round because she knows that it's her sister who has the child, but she can't get hold of her now. Bobby, however, is actually just grabbing a coffee before she heads on her way. She's heading out to their mother's. While she's in this coffee shop, she picks up a cookie, and it seems to be at the baby's behest. She doesn't seem to think about it until the baby actually spies the cookies, and then she just happens to purchase one. And it seems like a lot of the time that things aren't happening the way that the baby wants them. All of a sudden its will changes and the thing happens that it wants. As you can see, whatever is, I suppose, possessing this child is pretty powerful. Because where Natasha before was obviously childless, now everyone thinks that she has a baby and she's had this baby for months. But when Natasha finds out where her sister's actually going, she is even more pissed off because her sister is heading out to their mother's commune. And she knows that she's going to have to see her mother for the first time in a few years. And very much like with her sister, it's going to be very awkward. Bobby, however, has already got to the commune and has gone and sat out under a tree. She takes a picture of her and the baby and sends it to Natasha. And as soon as Natasha sees it, she knows exactly where Bobby is. She's just outside the commune, and as they pull up, Natasha gets out and starts running towards her sister. However, at this point, the baby has taken control once more, and Bobby is now choking on the cookie that she's been eating. We've seen this before when he killed Yolanda, so we know that what he's capable of when it comes to sweet treats. However, at this point, the baby isn't looking to kill anyone, and he's just playing. He wants to remind Natasha of the power that he has, and as soon as she gets close enough, he allows Bobby to spit out the cookie. Natasha takes the baby and thinks that her sister has been really selfish, especially bringing them out here. She didn't need to see her mother, and she heads back to the car. But once she's in the car, again, the baby has been working its magic and the car won't start, very much like outside the petrol station. As she gets out, they see a figure in the distance, and of course, it's her mother. She comes over and offers them to stay in the commune, and it seems like until the car is fixed, they're going to have to stick around. Miss Eves, however, just keeps reminding her that they need to get rid of the child, and she even suggests maybe throwing it in a lake. But at this point, all Natasha can think is just getting out of this situation. She just wants to get out, go back home, and then figure out what she needs to do next. But while she's here, all she can think about is being around her mother. And it's not a position she truly wants to be in. Once they get towards the commune, that night there is actually going to be a summer solstice, and they need to stick around and be involved in the activities that are going on. But of course, all Natasha wants to do is get out of here as quickly as possible, because with or without the child, this is an annoying situation for her. However, people keep telling her that the baby can sense everything that's going on around it. Like most parents, they all get that advice that babies sense exactly what's going on. And of course, the baby is crying quite a lot. And so everyone believes that it's because of the situation that it's in. The mother is highly stressed, and therefore the baby is picking up on that. And so while it's crying, everyone just keeps telling her that she needs to go and sleep. Her mother even tells her, look, just let him cry it out. Go upstairs, go to sleep, put him in his basket and just sleep. Eventually Natasha does, but the baby is still stirring until Bobby walks in and manages to put him to sleep properly, using the technique that she learned. However, as soon as Bobby leaves the room, Mrs. E spies her and realises that the baby is now quiet and therefore the baby must be asleep. She heads upstairs, grabs a pillow and walks over. As she does, she starts getting flashbacks to several of the people that this child has already been with, but she covers its face anyway. But as she does, whatever link is between the child and Natasha, still laid on the bed, starts choking as well. And at one point, Mrs. Eves notices this. She pulls the pillow away from the child's face, and of course, Natasha starts breathing normal again. But instead of stopping because she knows the link between the two of them, she just continues. And it takes Natasha scooting down the bed and kicking her off to actually stop her from trying to kill this child. And now, obviously, Natasha knows that she's linked to this child somehow, and any sort of harm to it will be too much, because it may affect her life as well. And it seems that Mrs. Eves isn't telling the whole truth. She mentions a name of Helen, and when Natasha claims, I'm not Helen, who the hell is that? Mrs. Eves realises that Natasha doesn't really know the whole truth. Eventually, Natasha goes outside and Mrs. Eves comes out with what looks to be some sort of mental connection with the baby. It seems like he has already got inside her head after what she tried to do to him, and she takes him outside. It's then we see how Mrs. Eves has been looking for this baby for a long time. We go through what happened to Lydia and Yolanda, and then the person before her, and then several different people before all of those people, leading right back into the day where Mrs. Eves was a hell of a lot younger. And we realise that this child has been around for so long, and Mrs. Eves has known about him for so long that they've been linked for what looks to be around 50 years. And so we have to now find out why these two are so well linked. But as always, that's going to be a story for next time. This show is so fucking silly. I mean, the concept is just ridiculous. Obviously, it's sort of a play on like the kind of Rosemary's Baby type thing. And honestly, kids are terrified to me. And this really makes me think, well, yeah, I was right not to have them. But I do really enjoy the show. I think it's so funny. I think some of the ridiculous ways that this kid has actually offed people is just insane. The whole first episode where she ends up catching the baby is just so stupidly daft. But it is really such an enjoyable show, and I can't wait to get into the second half of it, because I genuinely can't remember how it finishes. I remember coming into episode 4 and kind of going, oh, okay, they're going to be based at a compound, and it's going to be a bit weird, and I'm not going to enjoy it as much as I did the first couple of episodes, but I do really enjoy it. I think it's so fun. And just the way that this child is manipulating everyone around it, apart from her, she obviously knows that she never had a child, but now everyone's like, well, no, you've had a child since you had a child. And so it's just funny to watch how carefree and how different she was at the start. This single woman persona that she's got, and just sort of not giving a shit about anything, and obviously offending her mates as well at the same time, until now where she does seem to care for the baby a little bit. She obviously doesn't want to kill it, but she doesn't want it in her life either. But that's why I like the show. I think it's very different. Like I say, I'm not a big fan of children, but I'll put it with this one because he is integral to the plot. And it is just a very entertaining show. It's well written, it's funny. What more can you ask for? But I'm excited to see what happens in the second half. Like I said, I just cannot remember. I just remembered it was really good when I watched it. And I just want to get into the second half now. So that's going to come in 2 weeks. Obviously, I'm going to record it a hell of a lot earlier than that. At the time that I am recording it, it's currently mid-December, so I'm well ahead of time to get this show out at the end of February. But obviously, just 2 more episodes, and I'm going to be in season 8, and then I'm going to be 10 episodes away from 100. And so there's a lot of exciting things coming for the show in terms of milestones. So I'm done for today. I want to thank you guys for listening. Obviously, if you can, go over to Patreon. It'd be much appreciated. But until next time, thank you for your time, and I will speak to you soon. Bye. And that is it for now, amigos. And yes, I am as angry as you are at me for that sentence, but I hope you enjoyed the show and had some fun along the way. It means a lot that you are listening and supporting me. This is an independent podcast after all, and doesn't get a lot of backing, so it is great to know that you're out there, you're listening, and if you want to come talk to me on any of the platforms I'm on, just come say hi. I'm on Instagram, I'm on Twitter, and I'm even a little bit on TikTok. I don't post that much, but I'm on there. And you can also drop comments in the comment sections on any of the platforms: Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Podbean, wherever you get podcasts from. But as always, thank you for your time, and I will speak to you soon.